Welcome back to The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm the culture editor at The Bulwark. And I'm very, very pleased to be joined today by Ron Shelton, who is the writer-director of Bull Durham, and the author of the new book, The Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham, Home Runs, Bad Calls, Crazy Fights, Big Swings, and a Hit. His body of work includes White Men Can't Jump, Tin Cup, Cobb, Dark Blue. Fun fact, I became intimately acquainted with Tin Cup during the summer I spent working on a golf pro shop at a small country club in Virginia, where it played on a loop on VHS. I mean, literally would just stop it, rewind, go back and watch it over again, which was fun. I made my summer much easier. So thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it, Mr. Shelton.
I'm delighted to be here.
So let us talk a little bit about Bull Durham. I mean, I wanna set the stage for people because I don't know that everyone knows this. I mean, you are a former minor league baseball player yourself. When you were sitting down to write Bull Durham, this comes a few years after Jim Bouton's Ball 4 comes out. You know, people in the clubhouse weren't terribly thrilled by it. When you sit down to write this movie, are you worried about how the response might be from former ball players, or are you just trying to humanize them like Jim Bouton's book did?
I was trying to humanize them, of course, because they're us. I mean, they're just, instead of working, at a factory, they're playing baseball for a living and trying to, move up the ladder. They're a bunch of ordinary guys who are in extraordinary circumstances, and that's one reason I like them. I didn't think. I didn't understand why Bouton's book was so unpopular. I thought it really humanized everybody, including Mickey Mantle, to be honest. And I became friends with Jim Bouton later. And I think Jim Bouton's book made Bull Durham possible. This idea of these hagiographies of our sports heroes and political heroes being sort of Marvel Comics, DC Comics superheroes is absurd. And I just was, plus I think it's a funny world also, and a touching world, because guys like me thought their dreams were over, and I thought I was done at the age of 25. You think you're 80. And now I'm in my mid-70s. I don't think I've done it all. So things change. Now, I thought ball players would like Bull Durham, and they did.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned at the end of the book you did get some nice feedback from one of your former teammates, I think it was, who left you a nice little voicemail. That was It's always good to hear. So let's talk about writing the movie, because there's this great little vignette kind of as you open the section on writing the movie where you are essentially dictating Annie's opening speech. Is that kind of how you frequently write? Is that a normal way for you to get going, get words before they get to the page, or was that unusual?
Sometimes I'll work off a dictaphone just to hear the characters talk. I really need to hear them talk before I can do anything, because each character has to have their own voice. And you'll see a lot of scripts and even see a lot of movies where the dialogue is kind of interchangeable. Anybody could have said anything. And that's not good writing. It's not good drama, and it's not true to real life. You and I have different expressions. My wife and I, my kids and I, my friends and I. If you read a transcript, you know who's talking. Well, in the script, it should be the same. So I needed to hear her talk, and I dictated what turned out to be the famous opening monologue, not knowing where it was going to lead me, and it led me to the whole script.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you describe kind of putting the story together here is very interesting to me, because I talk to a lot of screenwriters for this show for other stuff, and a lot of them talk about working from an outline, right? We got to get from point A to point B, and your process here is very different.
I don't like the outline, but I like to know the broad strokes of where I'm going. In other words, I'm not entirely writing in the dark, but I also don't want to know how I'm going to get from point A to point B, because that's the discovery. While you're writing a scene, you discover things that lead you to surprising new scenes, where if it's outlined, it all feels very much, here's the dots, now go connect them. It feels like, some kind of AI robot could lay out a plan and connect the dots, but I want to be surprised. I want characters to say things I don't know what they're going to say. And when I'm typing and writing along and I'm on a roll, the characters are surprising me. I'm not talking to them, they're talking to me. So that's the goal of a writer, to get in that zone. And
Yeah.
when you can't get in that zone, you gotta wrestle it to the ground so it looks like you're in that zone. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you writing about how many pages you throw away when you're writing, because that is fascinating to me. I mean, it's certainly not how I work. I you know it is almost daunting to think about writing that much and just starting over again. How did that process work here? I mean, would you uh you know bang out a scene and just be like, all right, we need to go in a totally different direction with it, or what were you looking at?
Often, exactly that. You write a scene and say it's just not. There's not the energy. There's not the conflict. All scenes need conflict. All scenes of comedy, tragedy, whatever. They need conflict. I want something. There's a force of opposition keeping me from getting that thing. And you watch a movie or read a screenplay where it's just very professionally done, but there's no conflict, there's no life, there's no energy. All drama is based on conflict. I don't care what the genre, the tone. So you want to make sure you always got conflict. What does he want? What does she want? Why is there a problem? And even funny scenes. In fact, especially funny scenes.
Hmm.
The So yeah, I look at this is one draft. The script, the movie is the first draft with changes in rehearsal. But what nobody sees is all the things I threw out getting to the first draft.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean it feels, again, reading it feels like you're essentially doing five drafts at once, getting that whole thing out onto the page. Is this the section of the book where you're essentially going beat by beat through the story and talking about how you wrote it? Is this what it is like to be in a classroom situation sort of thing with you? Because you mentioned a little bit about doing workshops and writers workshops and that sort of thing. Is this like a good crash course if you're looking to figure out how to write a screenplay? What to do?
Look, I don't think there's one way to do it. This is the way I do it, or at least I did it on that movie and a couple others. Um, I don't think I have the way. I just have my way. And I know other people can't do it unless everything's outlined within an inch of its life. And the more I outline, the more deadly the writing is for me. So, I would never say this is the way to do it. What I will say, if somebody is a writer, is do you have the conflicts built in? And do we know what the characters want early on? Because you can't wait to page 40 to figure out why we're following these people. I mean, Shakespeare
Hmm.
was great at that. Somebody would walk out on stage and say, okay, there's two families. They hate each other, except the teenage boy and girl love each other. And you got Romeo and Juliet set up. All of his plays are like that. You know where you are at the very top of the show, and then he can take you on a place you didn't know you were going to go. And the screenplay used to have more time to set that up, but now because everybody's ADD and instant everything and impatient audiences, I tend to declare the want, the need, and the conflict way sooner than I used to. I mean, I spent the whole first act in Bull Durham. The whole first act is 5 hours, basically. It goes, or 6 hours. It goes from Annie putting on her makeup, going to the ballpark, and it ends that night. So presumably it's like 7 o'clock till midnight. And she's got Crash Davis and Nuka Luce sitting on her couch, and she's picking one. And it's 30 pages, and it all takes place in 5 hours, and we get the setup. Oops, she's with the wrong one. And it was her choice. So that's a pretty nifty setup. I wish I could always have such a good setup. So you have three characters you want to follow. They have completely different voices. And now they're involved in a menage a trois. And the two people who belong together can't figure out how to get out of their own way. Because all of us get on our own way in relationships, or want to change jobs, or want to whatever. It's usually us that is preventing us from doing what we want to do.
Yeah, yeah. I love the setup of this movie just because it is, as you say, it is people trying to get out of their own way. It is a very human drama. I want to talk a little bit more about human drama towards the end here, because there's a great line from one of the you say about one of your producers who wanted to make human films, not theme park rides. But we'll get to that. The other thing that you mentioned early in the book is you don't want to have too much sports in your sports movies. You don't want to have too much sports in your sports movies, but at the same time, you need actors who look like they can play sports. And I love the little story that you have about Kevin Costner basically wanting to try out, essentially show that he can play baseball. It almost felt like he was showing off a little bit for you.
Well, Kevin, I handed him the script, and it was lucky for a first-time director to get to somebody like that. He wasn't yet a star, but he was about to be, and you knew it. And I said, and he loved the script, and he said, look, I said, it's your part if you want it. And I wanted him to have it. He said he had to try out because I played professional. He just played in high school. We went to a batting cage. It's all in the book. And we're playing catch in the parking lot. Nobody even recognized him. A few months later, everybody would have stopped. And we put quarters in the machine. He hit right-handed, he hit left-handed. Now, was he showing off? Maybe a little, but athletes do that. Athletes are allowed to show off. That's what all of us show off when we can. But I really think he's very respectful of me and the fact that I made my living doing this. And he didn't want to get 2 weeks in and me just go, I don't believe you as a catcher. I don't believe you as a hitter. I mean, Kevin's very good like that. Yeah. And so I believe maybe there's some showing off, but he really did want to pass the test for his own comfort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is interesting to think about Kevin Costner, who has kind of become through the course of his career the great portrayer of athletes. I am hard pressed to think of another actor who is an actual actor as opposed to an athlete who later becomes an actor, who actually embodies the physicality of an athlete.
Yeah, he's on the list of one. I mean, Kurt Russell played minor league baseball and was an early idea for this, but he was unavailable. But Kevin could play basketball. He could play golf, as we can see. He's a very good natural athlete, and you just don't find that in Hollywood. You got actors who think they're athletes, but they're not. And you have athletes who think they're actors, but they're not. But he's very rare. And for me, we work together very easily on 2 different movies. He's highly professional. He's very prepared. He respects professional athletes a great deal. He knows how hard it is to make your living doing that. And so, yeah, I don't know how this movie works with any other actor, to be honest.
Yeah. With a book like this, when I'm reading a book like this and I'm jotting down notes of questions I want to ask, I always run the risk of essentially asking you to tell me all of the good stories from the book, and thus spoiling the book for people to read. However, there are so many good stories in here that we could not possibly get through all of them. So I just want to ask a couple of ask you to relate a couple of these specific stories to help people get a sense of the book. And the first of them has to do with the worst audition that you had in the process. What was the deal with Anthony Michael Hall?
I don't know. Had he called me to apologize or sent me a note, I wouldn't probably have written about this, but I still studio wanted him. We hadn't cast Nuke yet. He'd become much like 6 foot and he was athletic. Since we remember him from the John Hughes movies, he was growing up. And I thought, that's a version of Nuke. I hadn't met Tim yet. That's a version of Nuke. That might work. And they thought he had a hot movie in the can, and Johnny would be good. And so the producer and I flew to New York. He had the script for a week, and we set up a meeting. I described this all in the book, and we go to meet with him at 6 o'clock. He brings along a posse of 6 or 8 people. I couldn't believe it. And I said, what did you think of the script? And he said, I haven't read it yet. And can you imagine 2 guys flying across country? So I was pissed, and I said, well, we'll be back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow and read it, and don't bring your posse with you. And I left, and the producer, Mark Berg, stayed to kind of calm him down and say, just read it. You'll love it. It's great. The part is yours if you'll. So I came back the next day at 6, Mark and he was there with half the posse this time. And we start the small talk, and I said, no, let's just talk about what did you think of the script? What did you think of the part? He says, well, I'm up to page 30. And once he said he was up to page 30, I said goodbye. I walked away, and Mark stayed to coach him on, professional behavior in the future. He's gone on, he made 100 movies and TV shows. He's done fine.
Sure.
I went back to the hotel and I called the producers, the casting director, the agents, and said, don't want to meet this guy anymore. And that was the Anthony Michael Hall story. Except there was an executive who kept trying to fire Tim Robbins and put Anthony Michael Hall in halfway through the movie. So it's one of the many battles that the book is about.
Yeah. There's kind of a funny running motif in your book about the appropriate level of professional lying, the amount of kind of professional courtesy lying that you can get away with in a situation like this. I mean, when you're sitting down with an actor, or when an actor is sitting down with a writer or a director, how could they just say, I haven't read it yet? I don't. It's crazy to me.
I look at 35 years later, I just wrote about it. That's how crazy it still is to me.
Oh, it's good times. All right, let's talk about a much better audition process. Susan Sarandon, who was wonderful in this movie as Annie. She is one, the absolute kind of intellectual and emotional heart of the film, almost. What was her process like? Because you talk in the book about her not being on the studio's list, and yet she still winds up with the part. How did that come to be?
Well, there's the list, which I talk a lot about. Each studio has this list of who's approved and who's not approved, and the problem is it keeps changing. I mean, week to week it will change, and she wasn't on the list, and I didn't know why, because she seemed good and she seemed like a great idea. And I kept having to lie to her agent, saying, I don't think she's right for it. Well, I did think she was right for it. A lot of women were right for this part. But I didn't want her to fly from Italy when she was leaving with her baby not being on the list. Well, she insisted on it anyway. She says, I'm coming. You're going to have to see me regardless, because if I fly that far. So I said, okay. And I had Kevin there, and she came in. She was fabulous, but she still wasn't on the list. This is a story in the book that's pretty amazing. And we sat around going, wow, she was great. But what are we going to do? She's not approved. And about an hour later, the head of the studio called to say, she's on the list now. I saw her a couple of weeks ago. Well, we knew he didn't see her a couple of weeks ago because he was in Italy a couple of weeks ago. So what happened was that she went from the meeting on the studio lot straight to the studio that was making the movie, and she worked her way up and down the hallways until she met the right guys and saw the right guys, and she dazzled them. And she was in this red and white striped tube dress. And one thing I always loved about Susan is, no more outspoken, empowered, liberated woman exists, but she knows the power of a red and white striped tube dress. And and I introduced her like that once, and she went, "You're damn right I do." So. She wasn't ideological like that. Anyway, that's how she got on the list, and she got the part immediately.
Yeah, it's a great story. Again, you really got to pick up this book. I'm going to link to it in the email, but Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham, Home Runs, Bad Calls, Crazy Fights, Big Swings, and a Hit. Make sure you go to Amazon and pick it up. All right, one last story. One last story. Tell the story of Kurt Russell almost getting this part. I don't want to spoil it for people. How did Kurt Russell almost get his way onto the set?
Well, the background is that the first person I thought of was Kurt because he played ball, and I knew Kurt from the best of times. And I think he's a really underrated. I think he's a great American actor. And I think now in his career, everybody realizes, wow, this guy's got a massive body of work. And we're having trouble 2 weeks into the show, 3 weeks into the show. I was fighting with everybody, the studio, not the cast or the crew, but studio. They wanted to fire Tim. They wanted to fire me. It's like, couldn't have been going worse. And I get on the set at 10 o'clock at night, they say, Mike Medavoy's on the phone. Now, Mike Medavoy was the head of the studio. And I knew they were having issues with the movie. And I take the call. This has to be on a hard line out in the middle somewhere because there's no cell phones.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah. And he goes, we've been looking at the dailies and I'm sorry, he's not working. Crash Davis, Kevin Costner's not working at all. We're going to replace him and put Kurt Russell into the lead role. And he's going to be on a plane tomorrow. We're going to reshoot everything you've done with Kevin Costner thus far. I go, you got to be kidding. You don't like Tim, and now you don't like Crash and Kevin? And then I start thinking, it's a long pause, and I say, Kurt, is that you? And he starts laughing. It was Kurt Russell. And we still laugh about that. We still laugh about it.
It's a great story. To the extent that I had to read it twice because I was like, I couldn't believe you end up working with Kurt Russell on Dark Blue, right? I mean, what was it like? This terrible question, but what was it like to work with Kurt Russell, who I agree with you is, I think, one of the great American actors, and I think is finally really, people are kind of starting to come around to that.
It was a joy. Kurt was an athlete, and I get along with guys who are athletes because they have a preparation, a discipline. They don't mind doing the same thing over and over. It's a very athletic thing, making a movie. And we had a shorthand. Again, he was totally prepared. He cared about every line. He had smart questions. He gave you everything he had. It was effortless. It was a little bit like working with Kevin. I mean, there's a lot of egos rage on movie sets, if you've heard, but not with Kurt, not with Kevin either. But Kurt, Dark Blue was about a tough, bad cop during the Rodney King, waiting for the jury to be out on the Rodney King riots, and a terrible time in Los Angeles, and good cops versus bad cops, and the whole complicated mess of it. It's ongoing still. And he humanized a really bad guy and made us kind of understand, well, this is where bad cops come from. They come from, You got a problem in your neighborhood? You want a nice cop or a tough cop? Well, in my neighborhood, I want a tough cop. Now, then when the problems go on, I want the nice cop to come back. Well, so you're asking cops to do it both ways. And they're not trained to do it both ways. They're trained to do it this way or that way. And I'm not defending bad cops. I'm just saying it's a tough job with multiple mandates. And somehow he took that character and made us care about him. And that's the most, as a human being, he's a really underrated, rather brilliant actor who can do anything in my mind.
Yeah. That movie is Dark Blue. There's a great Blu-ray of it out from, I believe, the folks at I forget. I'll link to that as well. But you should pick that up if you get a chance. Back to Bull Durham, which also Bull Durham on sale, Criterion Collection, half off for July at Barnes and Noble. If you're a Barnes and Noble shopper, go pick it up. Again, 50% off. Approved by the writer-director Ron Shelton. There's a sticker on the front with your signature on it. You've signed off. Can I ask what that process was actually like, working with the folks at Criterion? Did you just come in to, kind of look at the color timing and all that? What was that like?
Yeah, I approved the retiming because the color blue is a little different in the Criterion, and I said, well, it's actually closer to the real blue. And Mike Schrago, the great critic and film writer, he did a Q&A with me about sports films, the history of sports films. It's kind of interesting. I'm going way back to there was hundreds of silent film days. Sports was common. Buster Keaton had a baseball team. And he carried crew who were all baseball players. So a lot. Harold Lloyd did football movies. So we talked about that, and then there were some other specials and interviews. I don't know. I was unaware of all the detail that Criterion went through, but it was quite impressive.
Yeah. It's a great set. Definitely pick it up if you make your way over to Barnes and Noble for the Criterion sale. You mentioned egos, and there's a line towards the beginning of your book that I just want to read here because I think it's worth kind of setting the scene. Quote, "The engine that drives Hollywood is the ego. The financier is determined to prove he is not just about money, but has a creative bent as well," end quote. How much of the conflict in getting Bull Durham to the big screen had to do with massaging those egos. And the kind of follow-up question to that is, was this different now with a little bit of hindsight, with having worked on more films? Was it different on Bull Durham, or was it just kind of the standard, sort of big struggles between clashing personalities?
Well, I've had a worse experience, but I won't talk about it because the movie didn't come out very good. But this was battle because I just thought we're fighting fights that shouldn't be fought. That now I got this great cast, and now they want to get rid of the cast. They said the movie wasn't funny halfway through shooting. They said it wasn't sexy and romantic. They said that they called me in Durham to say, trying to fire Tim again. They say nobody will believe that Susan Sarandon will end up in bed with Tim Robbins. Well, guess what? I'm the godfather of their firstborn. Okay, so
they were married in real life. Just if you don't know,
after the movie, whatever.
Right.
And so they were wrong about everything. So why are you fighting the fights that you're already winning? There should be no, and that's where the ego comes in. Everybody has to prove why they have their job. Mm-hmm. I've noticed this. You give a script, could be the greatest. If you gave Citizen Kane to a story editor now, he'd give you 30 pages of notes. or a more pop movie, Lethal Weapon. The first was great, funny and popular and smart and, crowd pleaser and plays in the malls. But, anybody, they can't, so nobody can just say, oh, you're right, great, go with it. Everybody has to give you notes. And I've become smarter and more political about the massaging part of it. I'm still considered somewhat difficult, which I don't understand because I make my movies. Casts love me, crews love me. I work day and night. I'm tireless. There are no problems on the set. I solve them all on the set. So there's no fires come out. And I've worked with some of the biggest actors in the country, and I have great relationships with them, supposedly some difficult people, not to me. I use the athletic model, Earl Weaver, the screaming manager for Hall of Fame manager. Players loved him. They loved him. I talked to everybody in the Orioles. Yeah. That was my team. Yeah. And why? Because they said if he got angry, it was never personal. In other words, he would bark at you for something. He said, every player said, he barked at me for something I deserved to be barked for. The point was made, and he never was brought up again. That's good teaching, managing, coaching, directing. And so, I'm not great at massaging. I've worked hard on it my whole career. I'm not sure I've made progress.
It's hard. It's hard to be confronted with bad notes. And you definitely got some bad notes. I was fascinated by the test screening stories from this book. I couldn't believe that this movie didn't test well. And test screenings are like a personal fascination of mine. I had on this show Kevin Getz, who used to work at NRG, has a book out called Audienceology, which is about kind of the making, the behind the scenes test screenings of all these movies. And I watch Bull Durham and I'm like, perfect movie. I mean, whatever. I could probably come up with some notes, but perfect movie, entertaining, funny, great date night movie, whatever. And it just never quite popped with those audiences. Why was that?
No, Kevin is the guy I called up to say when I was writing the book, I just remember the bad test scores. Can you, look them up? It was all in his computer. Mm-hmm. So all the test scores and the dates and the places of them came from Kevin. From I'm not making that up. Those numbers.
Yeah.
Those were research. To this day, I can't figure out why it didn't score higher. And what I learned is, I think it's an interesting observation, is that the more educated and literate the audience, the worse the scores are going to be, because you give them a pen and a pad and say, answer questions and be critical. They're going to show you how smart they are instead of just share how much they just enjoyed their experience. So they got their sides of the brains are in conflict or something. Give me a working class audience every time. They laugh, they cry, they cheer, they boo. I know right where I stand. And So I don't know. It's a mystery to me. And here, 35 years later, I mean, for 35 years, the movie is just sort of ascended in terms of how it's respected and beloved. And now it's all these people's favorite movie. Where were they when I was test screening it? It would have made my life a hell of a lot easier.
Luckily, it all worked out. People were able to kind of put aside those scores and release the movie in, I mean, the form you wanted, right? I mean, this is you in a. I don't know. I'm asking, like you got more or less final cut here, right?
Yeah, as I always make the argument that the audience has final cut. If you really listen to the audience, that's where the movie has to be.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell the audience, "No, I'm going to give you 20 more minutes whether you like it or not," because. But there's some directors that do that.
Yeah,
and you have to not overcut it too, because I can be ruthless, and sometimes you go, let's put that scene back a little longer. It plays better. So you've got to find the balance, and that's where other voices, the editor, and other people will come in your editing room and say, "Chill, Ron, it's working. Just go to the next scene." So but the test screening is a very, very frightening part of the process. I've only made one movie that tested through the roof, and Why Me Can't Jump in the Black Theater of LA.
Okay.
We got like 103%. It was like a Balkans election, It was like people. Louisiana election was real long. Guys were voting twice, But in the White Theater, 2 weeks later, it scored terrible. And the head of the marketing company said, "Don't worry. If the black audiences embrace this movie, which they will, based on our test screening, white audiences will follow." And then when it opened in that theater that tested badly, it was through the roof again. So Tin Cup never got over 68%, which is not good. I mean, Bull Durham never got out of the 50s. And it opened, and Tin Cup opened number one in the country and was number one in the country for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And again, the audience you sit there and the audience is enjoying it, they're laughing, they're cheering, whatever. And then it's not reflected in the number. I don't get it.
Yeah. It's interesting what you just said about White Men Can't Jump. If the black audience is there, the white audience will follow. I mean, did you get the sense that the white test audiences were nervous about enjoying it? I mean, because it's a provocative film in its own way. I mean, it's not a I could see people being concerned, like, oh, am I allowed to like this? I don't know.
I think so. I think they were nervous until they were told it's okay to like it, that it's actually supposed to be cathartic and funny and irreverent about things that we're tiptoeing around. I mean, that movie, I made 2 movies set in that time period. That movie and Dark Blue, they're all made, during the Rodney King trial and riots, bizarrely. Actually, this was shot just before the jury and the riots and all that. The jury came out with the acquittal. So I think it was a relief to people to know that there's humor here. It's life embracing. It's funny. The white guy and the black guy got along with each other better than either one of them did with the women in their lives, which says something about our nature, sadly, perhaps.
Yeah.
But so that was the only one that really scored.
That's interesting. So, in your book, you talk about Bull Durham leading this sort of renaissance amongst minor league teams. People would show up at the minor league ballparks again. I'm curious to get your perspective on the minor leagues from 3 different eras. 1, when you were a player. 2, kind of in the immediate aftermath of Bull Durham and folks coming back, and 3, how it is now. I mean, you still go to the parks for retro screenings and that sort of thing. I'm sure you are still a fixture. I'm curious what you make of the minor leagues now as opposed to when you were a player or when the movie came out.
Well, the ballparks and the lights are a hell of a lot better when I played. I think the minor leagues are a really important part of American sort of social life and culture and fabric. I think small towns love them. Television drove them out of business, and then I think television drove people back to the ballpark after Bull Durham, and And people started realizing that selling small town professional baseball of guys watching them maybe get to the big leagues or not was thrilling. There's nothing on television like that. So I think it really has been thriving. And then the current Major League Baseball administration, which is just, I think, a horror, Rob Manfred, they cut 40 teams in town because the owners are now think it's not worth the investment. Well, that's really sad because in such a tough, polarized, what's going to happen to our country next environment we're living in, everybody went to the ballpark and doesn't care. Nobody cares who you're voting for. What this? I mean, Roe Wade. I'm against what just happened. I believe in the women's rights, but those arguments don't happen at the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And in a certain way, it's a sanctuary. And we'll have our arguments later. We'll fight over policies later. But let's go watch a ball game and have a hot dog and a beer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually pretty thrilling because you sit much closer to the field. It's more intimate. You can see the speed of the game. Big league parks are so gigantic. It's just something happening way over there as opposed to, oh, I'm in the living room here. So I hope that the trend turns around and we don't lose 40 more towns and teams. And it was really interesting because you had somebody on the far right, like the Louisiana guy that got shot was the congressman. What was his name? Anyway, there was far right and Bernie Sanders were all fighting to keep the minor leagues. And I thought, that's the power of the thing.
Yeah.
As an American institution.
Yeah, for sure. My boss, Jonathan V. Last, he listeners of the show will probably know him, but he had season tickets to the minor leagues, loved taking his kids, would go all the time, loved to see. It was a Nationals affiliate, so the players would be playing in Prince William County, and then a couple months later in the majors, and he'd be like, hey, we saw him way back then. It's a great time for kids, for families. And gets them young too. You gotta get people interested in baseball when they're young. It's a harder sport, I think, to get into when you get a little older.
Yeah, and the young people I know, because my son just graduated from high school as a baseball player. He rarely watches. It's all this. It's all the little thing in your hand, and he still knows more about what's going on. But hey, you want to watch a game? He'll go to a game.
Yeah.
But we'd rather go to a college game in LA than Dodger Stadium because it's so hard to get to Dodger Stadium. And I was just invited to the All-Star game next week. I don't know. It's too hard to get there. Honestly. I mean, geez, I got to leave at 2 PM to get home. Yeah. And I always go to the minor league games if I'm in a town. I'm going from New York, pushing the book the last week of this month. And then I go to Durham for 4 days. And I'm really looking forward to that because A, they love me in Durham, and B, I get to sit there and watch the Durham Bulls play in a AAA stadium.
Oh, that'll be fun. When are you going to be in Durham? We'll tell people, maybe if anybody's listening, they can show up.
The 30th, July 30, 31, and August 1. I leave the site. I'm there for 3 or 4 days. I'm doing some at the ballpark, signing at the bookstores, stuff like that.
Great. Well, if you're in Durham, make sure you head out to a Bulls game. And pick up a copy of the book. Again, available on Amazon, Church of Baseball, Barnes & Noble, local bookstores everywhere. Pick it up.
I want to say one thing, Sonny. My family back on my father's side is all Texas,
mm-hmm.
West Texas. And they were dirt farmers. And people in California don't know what dirt farmers are. That means where your land is so poor you can only grow dirt.
Yeah.
And they moved to Bakersfield area, which is basic to work in the oil fields, like in 1920.
Mm-hmm.
My father came out of the West Texas Bakersfield thing. And because Bakersfield is exactly like Texas. I've been to both.
Mm.
But they were all storytellers. They could do nothing and tell a 2-hour story about doing nothing that would just, capture you. My dad would do it. I talk about that in the book. He'd go to the grocery store for a quart of milk. He'd come home. It'd be a 2-hour story, and you would listen to every word. It'd be great. And then you'd realize he forgot the quart of milk.
You spent some time in Texas playing ball as well, and this is of course is where I am based now. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex. What's your best memory of Dallas? Best or worst, either way. What's
Uh,
your favorite story from the time here?
well, I played for the Dallas Fort Worth Spurs in the Texas League. That was Double A before, about a year or two before it became the Texas Rangers. So they were building in um, what's the town the ball is? Probably Six Flags. Arlington, right there. They were building. So we're playing in a partially built Major League Stadium, and what I remember is the heat. I just remember losing like 12 pounds a day of liquid, and then after the game, drinking a pitcher of iced tea, and then having a couple of beers. I mean, just trying to stay hydrated. But that was, and then of course, also in the league was San Antonio, El Paso.
Sure.
You get this league. Yeah. This league went from Albuquerque to Memphis, Shreveport, Little Rock, Amarillo.
That is a heck of a summer right there, from Memphis to Albuquerque. Oof.
Yeah. And I remember loving El Paso because, it's across the river from Juarez before Juarez became such a dangerous town. And you go into Juarez after the game, you get a big meal, and your $5 went a long ways in Juarez. So, but yeah, in Amarillo, I remember being that was a tough place because there was a slaughterhouse behind the left field wall, and the wind blew in. I'm not joking. So not only would fly balls left not go out, you're smelling the slaughterhouse all the time. And I felt really bad for all those guys that had to play in Amarillo all year. They tended to do very well and move up just to get out.
Just to get out, either get up or gone. Yeah. One of the two.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is boy, that's just about everything I wanted to ask. There one last thing. I mentioned this a little earlier. You talk early on about your friend and producer Ed Pressman. And you talk about how he made movies about human behavior and not lost leaders for theme parks. What is your current sense of the industry? Because I get responses both ways from folks who think that, look, the world of streaming gives us more opportunities to make stuff for niche adult audiences. And then I also hear from folks who are like, they just don't want to make anything. They don't want to make anything except, the Marvel movies and the DC movies. What is as somebody who's been working in the industry for 40 some years now, I mean, what's your kind of take on where everything lies?
It's a mixed blessing, I think, really. I wish it was easier to get movies made for theaters. I understand why that's not a very good business model anymore, and therefore I'm glad that streaming is out there as an option. Streaming companies tend to be really driven by algorithms, as opposed to individuals saying, "Let's take a chance on that one." Every movie that gets made checks certain boxes in their AI department, so it's very corporate and inhuman. But as long as movies are getting made, who cares? Because that story's being told is all it is, and stories reflect our times and life and culture and problems and celebrations. So I'm glad their streaming exists. I'm sorry it's also corporate because people say, well, look at how many movies get made on the streaming. I said, yeah, how many are any good? I mean, honest to God, we keep forgetting. There's 500 shows on TV. Yeah, how many are good?
Yeah.
But it's better that there's 500 than there's 25.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting time. It's a very interesting time. And you toward the end of the book, you mentioned that you're working on a Civil War picture, or I guess just post Civil War.
And it's a Western set, post Civil War in Kansas, called Wicked Kansas. And it's I grew up in Westerns. I talk in the book about Peckinpah and having a relation to his team and his movies, and I've been trying to make a Western. It's written as a series, and my office here is with Frank Marshall, and who's pretty good resume as a producer, and
He's done a few things.
And his wife, Kathleen Kennedy, between them.
Yeah.
So we're out trying to set that up right now, find the right home for it. And I would love to do that next, but I'll do whatever comes up first.
One last question, and then I'll let you go. It's funny. I've been working through Kevin Costner's filmography for a different project, and I finally, for the first time, saw Fandango, which I think is that a Frank Marshall? Did Frank Marshall produce Fandango? No, was that was it was Amblin?
It's mentioned in the book, Fandango.
Yeah. When you so you saw Fandango before you cast Kevin Costner, I presume, right? Yeah. And what was your reaction to him like? Because I watched that movie and I'm like, oh my God, he's fully formed in his first. That this is Kevin Costner. I've never seen anything like that before with an actor.
I was taken by it. It was a little movie. Nobody saw it. I saw it, and then I saw him in a big movie. He wasn't the lead. He was about the fourth lead, Silverado.
Sure.
And Silverado, he plays a completely different kind of character. He kind of plays the crazy young cowboy. Yeah. And I thought, this guy can do that and that. He's got range. Kevin doesn't get the recognition for the range he has because, he's easy to pick on. He's a big star. He keeps reinventing himself. But he's done tremendous range in his career. So I think Fandango to Silverado, plus they told me he could play ball. I said, this is my guy.
Silverado's an interesting one as well because, as you say, he's almost the comic relief in that. He's almost the goofy younger brother, which is very, again, different from Fandango, where he's a almost countercultural, draft dodging. Yeah, it's just very interesting to go back and look at those early movies. I always like to end the show by asking if there's anything I should have asked, if there's anything you think folks should know about Bull Durham, about baseball, about life in general. What should I have asked that you think folks should know about?
I have zero life advice for anybody, Sonny. I'm still trying to figure it out. I look at the book. I think, why write about a movie you made 35 years ago? Well, I think the book answers that question. It's about more than the movie. It's about how to survive in a certain way, and how to stay focused, and how far willpower will carry you, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, name of the book: "The Church of Baseball: The Making of Bull Durham, Home Runs, Bad Calls, Crazy Fights, Big Swings, and a Hit," by Mr. Ron Shelton. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, Sonny, very much.
We will be back next week with another episode of The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. I'll see you guys then.
Hey guys, I'm Tom Welling. I used to play Clark Kent on Smallville.
I'm Michael Rosenbaum. I used to play Lex Luthor on Smallville. Join us every week as we go back.
Way back.
I'm excited.
I know.
Are you?
Can't wait.
Join Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum every week as they rewind every episode of Smallville and discuss their experiences with friends, fans, and co-stars. Talkville, the ultimate Smallville podcast. Listen anywhere you get your podcasts or watch on YouTube.